Okay. Actually, this is sort of nice. It's a little more informal, and initially we were asked that, well, give some kind of a talk. So both of us prepared something, and then I think we were going to have another interactive session as well. I just want to say something that I didn't say up on the podium, which is that to be worthy of this reward, one had behind it all an institution, and there was a staff who shared our vision and who shared our enthusiasms, and that whatever we were able to achieve was really because of the kind of team that one had put together. And I would like to acknowledge that today, that that was a very important part of whatever we may have accomplished, had also to do with the CLR team, the Center for Learning Resources. A couple of people are here today, and well, today's Teachers' Day, and as was said by one of the speakers, that I've actually taught children, and both of us, taught children, taught teachers, taught teacher trainers, and various school personnel and so on. So when Farida asked, what are you going to talk about? I had no problems. I said, I will talk about teaching and the teacher, okay? And I think that at this point in time in the education system today, particularly those of us who are working in the whole sector of disadvantaged, children from disadvantaged communities, schools that are for disadvantaged children, that tend to disadvantaged children go to, municipal schools, rural, tribal schools, and so on, as well as for private schools. I think it's quite a good thing that right now we revisit what do we mean by teacher quality and teaching, quality teaching and teacher quality, both, So I thought that, we've all met excellent teachers, and we've met teachers who need strengthening. In our CLR work, we met both types of teachers, and all of us also, we've known good teachers and we've known not so good teachers. Yes. So one of the kind of devices that is fairly common to use in our center was involved a lot in in-service teacher training. Teachers who are already teaching, to try to upgrade the quality of what was going on in the schools. And it's a fairly common sort of device that you ask participants to connect with their own teachers in their own childhood. Who were the good, memorable teachers, So we used to do that as well, and various participants would come up with various qualities that they would talk about. And one day I was taken a little by surprise because a young gentleman, one of the participants, asked me, what about you, ma'am? Tell us about one of your memorable teachers, So I thought about it, and yes, I was lucky. I had actually quite a few good teachers, but one stood out over all others. And there is one person here, a very dear cousin of mine who was with me in school, and she would know exactly who I'm talking about. And this was a teacher. So I told the participants about how this teacher she was so versatile. She brought history alive, poetry, literature. She introduced me to Tagore in translation. And but there was another reason why she actually stood out, and why I held her so high in my estimation. And I have to tell you a story about that, which is that one day, the school had a tradition at 7:10, it was a boarding school, at 7:10 you had to be ready for breakfast and so on, everything dressed and ready. The bell rang, and there had to be absolute silence in the school. And the younger children went to their classrooms and they were read to from various spiritual texts at their level and so on. Seniors were allowed to go wherever they wanted on the premises. It was a time where you could say the prayers from your own traditions, religious traditions, if you wanted to, but be on your own, be prayerful if you wished, be quiet somewhere in the premises if you wished. And it was a very lovely time. I mean, we did actually appreciate it. But one day, I was not prepared for a geometry test. And you were not supposed to do anything of that kind, study or thing. You were supposed to either just be quiet or say your own prayers, etc. And I took my theorems, those Euclidean theorems, and a book with me, and a teacher happened to be passing by. I didn't even know that she had passed by, and she obviously saw me studying. After breakfast, she called me and she said, "I think you were doing this," and I had to own up. I said, "Yes, I was," and I was worried about the test. And she said, "Why do you think it was wrong?" And I said, "I think it was wrong because I broke a rule. It was a rule." And she said, "That actually you may in life have to break some rules, depending on a cause or depending on how you interpret something that is very important to do, and you may break a rule. So I'm not too worried," she said, "about breaking a rule. But try and think again, what was wrong about it?" And finally I had to say, "Yes, I broke a trust." And she said, "Exactly, your relationships throughout will depend on the trust that can be put in you." And I was really very profoundly affected by that. And I wrote home to my parents about it. And my father, in his inimicable way, instead of congratulating the teacher, congratulated himself and wrote back and said, "We chose the right school." Okay. So basically, you see, the perspective I'm trying to give, as you can see, that the examples of my own school days, the part about the love of reading and history, and that is the cognitive or the intellectual sort of role of the teacher, yes, and the subject teaching and so on. But the story of how my transgression was addressed, that symbolizes the affective or the ethical aspect of the teacher's role. And taken together, they signify another important aspect, relationship. And that a relationship of a caring teacher with the whole child, not just academics, but the whole person. And I think that at the CLR, in all our training programs, we try to keep these aspects in mind. Even though our main focus was to improve learning levels, the academic learning levels, but when you had teachers and you had the opportunity to work with teachers, you had to think about the whole child and the whole student. Now, for those of us who work on children from disadvantaged communities, the role of the school and particularly of individual teachers is of paramount significance. With universal elementary education, the right to education, legislation, the teaching profession has to find a point of relevance that is for the education of students across a huge array of socioeconomic, cultural, and academic starting points. So at the time when I was completing my postgraduate studies in education, there were dominant beliefs within the profession in the US, and those beliefs actually limited the teacher's perception of their own role. Some of you may have read Christopher Jenks, Christopher Jenks was bringing out this book at that time, Inequality, a Reassessment of the Effect of Family and Schooling in America. And he proposed, and I quote, "The character of a school's output depends largely on a single input, namely the characteristics of the entering children." What does that mean? See, quite obviously, that there's not much teachers can do to change the stars that have already determined the capabilities of their students, mainly through their class and family backgrounds. So this was the time when there were a lot of programs, what we call here reservations. In America, it was affirmative action, and particularly for the black community. You know, so I remember feeling disheartened by this, and because you're just entering the teaching profession and so on, and this is what is going on all over, sort of around you. And so thereby another small tale, which is that in college, I was a teaching assistant to a professor in the department of philosophy of education. And so as a teaching assistant, you had to take discussion sessions after your professor had given the class for the week, and you had to take a discussion session after that with the undergraduate students, and you had to correct assignments that were given. So he would randomly check the grades I gave, and we never really had any disagreements very much, except one day. And he called me and he showed me a paper, and he said this question, "Do you really think this student deserves this grade?" And I said, "No, compared to the other people to whom I've given this grade, this is certainly not the same level. But I thought that for her, it was okay, and I didn't want to discourage her." Now that was a black student, okay, from the Negro community. And he says, "This is not right, Zakia, because they've worked hard, she's worked very hard to get into this college. She has the same aspirations as all the white students here, and to do this is actually shortchanging her. So come into my office, there's a coffee percolator there, make yourself a cup of coffee, make her a cup of coffee, sit down, discuss it with her, ask her to rewrite it, and then see what happens." And I did that, and it really, I learned something, which was that working that way with a student who needs a little bit of strengthening and so on, it certainly produced the kind of results, and that I had been wrong in just giving a grade which was actually that initially she didn't deserve. So this was just something that I thought I would share, because as time went on, Jenks's proposition was challenged, as you would know, if you've, there were a lot of studies. Was the power of the teacher as minimal as Jenks made it out to be? And it was time and time again, I mean, a cohort of disadvantaged children receiving good teaching, and private schools, well-to-do schools with ineffective teaching, and the disadvantaged with good teaching won out, always. So that was certainly hope that there was no question that it was not heritage or family background, but teacher quality that was making the difference. And I think that today is a good day to remember that. And of course, we are, generally speaking now, with the kind of very, very low learning levels in our Asar Pratham's studies have shown that, I mean, so stark is the reality of this low learning levels that sometimes we do have to concentrate on the basics. But our explicit curriculum, which is based today on the NCF, the National Curriculum Framework 2005, that call it the official curriculum that different states have then taken on. The official curriculum stresses basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and so on, but the NCF goes far beyond that as well and talks about the kinds of learning of critical thinking, interpreting, being able to interpret, to communicate effectively, and so on. And I think that we have to look at teaching in that holistic way and by all means stress learning outcomes of the basics, but at the same time not forget that the education vision of a nation cannot be limited simply to only the basics. And then there's the hidden curriculum, which a teacher has to keep in mind. I don't know if that term is familiar to you, but besides the explicit or the official curriculum, a good teacher does have to keep the hidden curriculum in mind. What is the hidden curriculum? It's the tacit messages indirectly that are conveyed to students. Okay, for example, a school that expects high academic performance at the expense of personal, social, or creative aspects of a child's development is teaching lessons about individual worth. The hidden curriculum conveys values, attitudes, behaviors. Students pick up whether a prejudicial statement is okay, whether questioning adults is not on. No. Those are not things that are done explicitly, but in the teacher's behavior, in the philosophy of the school as a whole, children pick up the lessons of the hidden curriculum. For instance, even if the explicit curriculum talks about actual valued knowledge of all kinds, but if the teacher is valuing the regurgitation of a point of view in an ill-conceived textbook instead of being able to get children to think for themselves, then what is the message that is actually being conveyed about what is the valued knowledge? So the role of the teacher is therefore vis-a-vis the explicit curriculum, the hidden curriculum, and always keeping that the basics at this point in time in our country we do have to take note of quite a bit. So I'd like to just conclude by saying that the role of the teacher is really to touch students' minds as well as their spirits. So it's to shape the kinds of human beings and future citizens we want them to be. Everything that a teacher teaches must have a direct relationship with that higher purpose. Thank you.